right. Hi, guys. My name is Philip Warwick, and welcome to my first deal, which ultimately led to millions. The first deal that you do in real estate or in business, no matter what your net worth, usually defines what type of investor you are. It's either the thing that inspired you the most, or it's a bad one and you learn from your mistakes. And I get to interview some of the world's most successful investors, local real estate groups, and entrepreneurs from all over the country so that you can get inspired. So whether you're very advanced or you're brand new at this, I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Adam Coffey. Adam is a veteran of the U.S. Army, the founder and CEO of Advisory Guru, a multi-million-dollar consulting business that works with a dozen private equity firms and more than 50 founders. Adam's desire now is to help multiple companies at a time rather than just running one, and that has led him to become a successful entrepreneur and consultant. He's also a successful author with his first book, The Private Equity Playbook, and his second book, The Exit Strategy Playbook. And so, without further ado, get ready to learn from one of the best in the business. And let's talk about your first business deal, Adam, which ultimately led to billions. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, Philip, how are you? It is good to be here. Hello to all your listeners out there. I was smiling when you were reading that introduction because I was laughing. I was thinking back, if I'd had known that question was coming first, I would have had a prop ready. Somewhere in my 40,000 iPhone pictures, I have a picture of me with my first seven-figure check, so way back when. And I remember, once upon a time, I used to, like back then they were checks. They weren't necessarily wire deposits and what have you. I'm an old man. I'm dating myself. But I used to make copies of the checks, and I had like a shoebox with all of my 7, 8, figure, 9-figure checks. And it was, each one of those was kind of like a different milestone in my life. So, and they're all special, right? Doesn't matter whether it's the first or the last, the biggest or the smallest, and right. I often tell people, the last company I ran, when I started with it, it was the smallest company I had ever started with. And it was the shortest period of time I had been a CEO when I sold it. And it was the largest payday of my personal career. So they don't all have to be big companies to yield big checks. And every one of them is special. They're like children. So, if I were to, I have to just go back. It's like, there's been so many milestones in my life. I've had a lot of careers within careers, a lot of sub careers, and each one of those had different kind of milestones. And, when I was in the Army, I was Soldier of the Year in 1984. Ronald Reagan is president. And, that was a special event for me, as a young guy, as a young soldier. But I had those all along the way in my career. There were kind of those different milestones. So I know I've been beating around the bush. The first $1 million check I got was when I sold a piece of a business that I was running, and the family office that owned the business at the time rewarded me with my first $1 million, check. And I'm hiding details on purpose. Sure. It was a private company, and the family office is keep stuff close to their vest. But I also, once upon a time, I have to tell you, Philip, I got paid for not selling a company. Oh. So it was another family office. It was a situation where they weren't necessarily ready to exit, but they sent me on my way to exit the business. And I literally, had buyers at the table at the price they were looking for, and they got cold feet, decided not to sell the business, but decided because I had done my job, they had to pay me. And that was another, big check. And that one was for actually not selling a company. So that's a good one.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you were sharing these checks, and I used to do the same thing. I had photos and photocopies of all the checks from the real estate deals and flips that I've done, and that was a nice little way of keep memorizing a trophy, right? Like for each deal that we'd done. And it's interesting. I don't tell this story very much, Adam, but I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and I tried to go to college. I dropped out of college twice because it was like, I'm just bored. I want to go to work. And I have my college dropout forms framed like a diploma. But on the back side of that, I have a copy of my first short sale acceptance letter from a bank where we actually negotiated a short payoff to be able to flip that house. And I like to say I barely made it
Well,
through
you're in
high
good
school.
company, young man, because
Yeah.
I'll tell you, if you think about the world's wealthiest people, I think several of them are not college grads either. And as a matter of fact, an old read, but one of my favorite books when I was first starting out and making my way, it was a contemporary book at the time. It was called The Millionaire Next Door. And, I remember, that book kind of put out a blueprint and a foundation for me. And one of the things I remember about that book back in those days is that there was no statistical correlation between education and wealth. And I'm not talking about earning a good living, because there is a statistical correlation between being educated, a doctor and, a lawyer or whatever, and earning a good income. But in terms of actually generating wealth defined as a decamillionaire or higher, there was no correlation at all. As a matter of fact, the majority of wealth came from small business owners, people who put their blood, sweat, and tears into building a business, across potentially decades, and then monetize that asset, as a part of their retirement plan, if you will. And that's where the majority of generational wealth comes from in this country. It's from people who worked for a living, and most of them, were not college grads back in that day.
Yep. Yep. Unemployable people with the so yeah, I love that. I love that about what you
Hey,
shared. Appreciate that.
entrepreneurs, sometimes we don't conform to
No.
societal, norms, we're a country that was born in rabble rousers, and so hard to put us in a box sometimes, and so I think people with ideas and put a lot of sweat equity into businesses, as you're doing with your real estate empire, those are the real success stories in America.
Yeah. So what motivated you to get into business for yourself?
I had, I had bunch of different crossroads in my career. And I think when you look back in life, at how you developed, I mean, I've had so many different careers. I was a soldier. I was an engineer. I was a business guy in the Fortune 500 world. And then I left, the comfort of GE during the Jack Welch era. It's a great time to learn how to run a business. I'm a rising executive. I'm doing well, learning a lot from the world's most admired company. This is before tech. Jack Welch, probably the most legendary CEO that was alive, at the time. And, he was at the helm. And so every time I was faced with some type of a crossroad or decision, I remember as an engineer, I was a young engineer out of the military, and I was an engineer at GE, and I'm hitting the glass ceiling. I'm like bumping up against it. I'm like in my early 20s. I'm making over 100 grand a year, and I'm really good at what I do. And I'm thinking, boy, if I really want to get wealthy, I can't do it being an engineer working for GE. I got to do something different. And I saw an opportunity to cross over from engineering into business. But that was scary because I was a really, really good engineer, and I'm untested as a business guy. And GE gave me that ability to do that. And I was educated at GE Crotonville, which was the world's most admired world's most admired MBA program that wasn't an MBA, where you had the leaders of the GE businesses teaching you how to run a global business. And so I took a chance, took a leap of faith, and said, well, I can always fall back and be a good engineer. That got me started in business. Then I had a crossroad, stay at GE or leave GE to go be a CEO for the first time. And, I had mentors within GE, and, I'll never forget the sage words of advice. There's a guy out there named Michael Martin, former Cleveland Browns football player, total influence, positive influence on my life, just a real motivational guy. And I was talking to him. He had moved on, was not my boss at the time, but I was talking to him about a job opportunity to go be president for the first time. And he said, Adam, once a president, always a president. Go ahead and leave GE. You won't regret it. And so I left GE, and that took me off on a 21-year career to be a CEO of multiple companies. But then if you're referring to the most recent time where I decided, hey, I'm going to hang up my CEO cleats, I've been doing this for 21 years, and I was building big businesses for private equity. And, I had done 58 acquisitions, billions of dollars in exits, and I was really bored. I was 21 years of doing the same thing. I was getting bored, and I'm like, I need a new challenge. And I loved teaching. I had been teaching at UCLA, helping some of the professors there in the executive MBA program. And, I was loving teaching, wasn't making a dime, making a ton of money as a CEO, wasn't having fun anymore. And I think, like, how can I switch this paradigm around? I'm 58 years old. Money's not the object anymore. And it's like, how can I have fun? How can I give back? And I've always been big on giving back. And, I decided, the statistics in America, there's 33 million small businesses in America, defined as 500 employees or less. 99.9% of all businesses in America fit in that category. Okay. I had spent a career working in the 0.1%. And I decided it's time to go to work and bring my skill set to bear in the 99.9, where I can work with multiple companies at a time. I can use the knowledge and wisdom that I gained over the years. I didn't create this. I was taught this. I learned through the school of hard knocks how to do all this. But I'm like, boy, I wish somebody would have given me this advice when I was starting out in my, early career as an entrepreneur or manager. And so, I've kind of dedicated, call it the next 10 years of my life, to giving back and making an impact and a difference to as many companies as I can in what I'm going to call the lower middle market, the sub lower middle market, small businesses, people who are earning their stripes for the first time, striving to create their own mini empires. And it's been a lot of fun, and I'm having a lot of fun doing that. And, that's how I first met you. You're building a real estate empire, and, boy, what a lot of fun it's been to meet all of these people and hopefully make a positive impact on their careers and their lives.
Oh, well, you've already made a positive impact on mine. That's for sure. From the first time, I met you at Mega when you spoke there for us, and I got an autographed copy of the exit strategy playbook from you at that event. And then, just like reading that book and the private equity playbook, the exit strategy, like everything has just been exponential growth for me and learning, and I'm happy to be part of the
secret. You didn't know this, Philip, but
and
I may have told everybody in the room, certainly at different times, but the first empire builder, where we had 300 plus people from, I think it was 27 countries around the globe, something like that. You all helped me write book 3, which is now, being written as we speak. It is called Empire Builder. It's coming out later this fall. But I perfected my first 2 books really via lecture and making sure that I kind of had my messaging dialed in. And so the 2-day Empire Builder, the first session we did in Dallas, that was, book 3. And so look for that one coming out this fall.
Definitely. I'll definitely be watching out for it. And, I've got a copy of the other 2 and enjoyed them both on Audible and reading them. So I love it. And I've been reading through the slides from that presentation as well, which has been great, just as a refresher. And so it's exciting, and I'm happy to be part of it and be, watching you build it and go from there and being in the group of the many that are going to have a positive impact and effect from your work. And so I think, based on everything that I've learned from you, any entrepreneur, whether they're thinking about exiting or thinking about private equity or not, can learn so much valuable information from you and the teachings in your book. So it's exciting to have you on and to be able to share.
Well, thank you. Bless you. And that is my goal and objective. And I think that the unique part of it is that this really isn't rocket science. It's not that there's not a secret decoder ring to finding success. There are people who I've made every mistake someone can make, throughout my career, but I survived and learned. And so as a result of that, after decades of doing it, I can now share kind of the lessons learned in the formats that I'm doing this, and it's digestible and it's easy to understand. Yeah, I think you participated in this one we did recently that was called the perfect $100,000 business. And
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
the other thing is that, to build a $1 billion business, you first have to build the perfect $100,000 business, the perfect $1 million business. And then you got something that can scale, and scaling is so much easier than creating something that works. And, I've can't tell you how many times entrepreneurs have told me, oh, I'll figure out how to make money once I get bigger. And it's like, well, boy, that's a disaster. That's a train wreck waiting to happen. They just don't know it yet. It's like, if you don't make money small, you're not going to make money big. What you are going to waste is time and effort and sweat equity. And unfortunately, we have a finite length to our careers. And so I've been teaching people, if you can get it right small, big is just a foregone conclusion. The real magic is making a business work small. You get it done right at that level. Scaling to any size you're looking for is just a mathematical equation. And there's different tools that come into play at different sizes, but it all starts with getting it right, getting it dialed in small. That's why I love the effort that I'm doing. As I'm working with businesses, I can help people perfect their model now, so
Right.
that as they build empires down the road, they'll be much more successful with them.
That's great. That's a great concept. So we all think big, like we all want to go big. So how do you slow an entrepreneur down and be like, hey, let's perfect it small. I know you want to go big and you have the ambition, and if he can do it, or if you can do it, I can do it. That's what we think.
Well,
But how do
it's there's this thing called patience,
yeah,
and sometimes we have to get old to find it, and I have a wood shop and a bunch of woodworking equipment. And, I look at what I crank out now, and I think to myself, man, that's what age, wisdom, and patience teaches, is taking the right steps in order, taking the right amount of time. If you'd have dialed me back into that wood shop, 30 years ago, I'm like, okay, I want to get it done tomorrow. Well, I don't care. It's supposed to cure overnight. It's like, I'm gonna give it 30 minutes, put a hair dryer on it, and then I'm gonna be back to work, on that finish, or whatever. And it's like, you learn patience. And so I think an entrepreneur needs to have many different skill sets. We want to be aggressive because we want to grow our business. But if we don't have it right yet, talk to a chef. If you don't have the ingredients mixed just right, you don't start baking. You need to get things cut, the right measures, mixed together at the appropriate time. It's like a world-class meal is developed, by the chef, in the kitchen. And the same thing holds true with businesses. There are some people you just can't slow down, and you're going to get, I'll call it the requisite probably outcome that you think you're going to get when you're not being patient. So I think oftentimes for business people, it's like, listen, do you want to build a $10 million business? Yes. Do you want to build a $100 million business? Of course. Well, let's build a good $1 million business first. So slow down, time out, take a breath. Let's deconstruct what you've got built so far, because we need to do some adjusting here. And think of it this way. If I was given some advice to some people who were doing a buy and build, which is putting a bunch of companies together. And we were talking about when's the right time to put a good ERP system in place. And they're thinking, well, after we put 8 companies together, then we'll have size, and maybe that's the time. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You only have 1 company today. Put it in place right now. Now I've got a platform I can integrate people onto, and 8 companies from now, I'm going to be so thankful I'm done with a scalable platform, rather than, okay, now I've got 8 companies. Now I have to put in place a platform, and boy, that conversion can be painful. So, there's things we need to do to find success. And I usually find if we dial in success small, then success large is just a foregone conclusion.
man, that leads perfectly into my next question. And say, once we dial it in small and we've got the success small, now we're ready to scale. But the thought always comes up: financing. How do we fund scaling? Where does the money come from? Right? They say it takes money to make money.
Well, there is some truth to that, but I'll tell you that if you've dialed it in small, you're throwing off cash. You're generating cash. You'll be able to self-fund some of your own growth. It also depends on what type of business you have. You're building a real estate empire. Real estate empires require a lot of capital by nature. And everybody I know that's a successful real estate investor, Their real superpower is they're a people person who's very good at raising capital. And yes, they know how to deploy it and they know what to do with it once they get it. But the superpower of a real estate empire is not knowing what to do with the capital. It's finding enough capital in order to fund more and more projects, because real estate's a very capital intensive business. Service businesses, though, are not very capital intensive. And oftentimes, in some of my seminars and in my shows, I talked about the theoretical landscape maintenance company. Everybody can wrap their heads around, you look outside your window and there are people out there in trucks with lawnmowers cutting people's grass every day. It's easy concept to grasp. And I talk about unit level economics. And in that respect, unit level economics is a crew. It's one truck, two people, commercial lawnmower, and some weed whacker, blower, some rakes, and some shovels. And it's like, that's my unit level economics. And if I build the unit level economics right, I'm throwing off significant cash at the unit level. So, once I hit $1 million in revenue, 7 crews later, I all of a sudden am generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in positive cash flow. So I have capital to grow slowly. If I want to accelerate growth, then I'm going to need capital from others, or outside. And so there's a multitude of different ways that a person can do that. Certainly I tell everyone you should start with your local banking relationships. If you are in a large bank, be it national or a large regional, they're going to have a commercial bank inside them, and they exist to loan money to businesses. There's the Small Business Administration. There's the SBIC program, whereby people lend to small business, and you can do loans that are measured in the millions of dollars to find capital for expansion. Certainly, you can also rely on other means. I'll give you an example. My brother and I bought an insurance agency once upon a time. It cost $4 million to buy. We got the seller to take a $1 million note at 10% interest. We borrowed $2 million from a family office at 10% interest, and then we found 3 friends and brought them in as equity partners, give us some money. So we made equity $1 million. We borrowed 2 from a family office. We borrowed 1 from the founder who was selling us the business. The business was $4 million in revenue. It was cash flowing $1.7 million in positive cash flow at $4 million, a lot of capital. It paid off all of that debt in the first 4 years. We owned it for 15 years, and we were then distributing all of the profit once the debt was paid off to ourselves. We ran the business for 10 years, 11 years after the debt was paid off, and then we sold it for $12 million. And although these numbers aren't big, if I think of it in terms of multiple of invested capital, it was the single best, highest return on investment that I made my entire career so far, because the amount of cash we distributed over that 15 years and the amount we sold it for against the original $1 million in capital, you're talking a 12 times multiple of invested capital just on the exit to the entrance, 12 million versus 1 million of equity. But we distributed millions every year for a 11-year period after the debt was paid. You add all that in, it was like a 40 times multiple of invested capital. It was like the home run of my career. I'm sorry it wasn't a bigger company, but hey, there's a lot of ways to finance your dreams. I think the easiest solution, though, is first you have to have a good business. If you have a good business, unit level economics are right. You're a real estate empire. It's that first rental house. It's the first, your Airbnb rental house. It's the first rental property. As you learn how to do whatever it is that you're doing out there, now that you're good at it, raising capital, although it seems daunting, to me is actually the easier part of the equation. Knowing what to do with it, proving to people that you know what to do with it and can generate the kinds of returns that they're looking for that capital, whether it's debt, or equity, whatever the case may be. A lot of real estate projects are project by project, and so there's equity and debt components inside each building, or each apartment complex or commercial building, whatever it is. So I think learning how to do it small demonstrates that expertise. And then you and I have had some conversations offline just about the importance of being seen by others as an expert in your field. so that when you're seeking capital, they're not like, well, who is this person and what rock did they crawl out from under? No, this is a person with a track record. This is a person who's a thought leader in an industry. This is a person I can see myself backing. And raising capital becomes easier as we get better at understanding how to run an effective business.
Yeah, I love it. And I, like you, I've got 20 years experience, been full time for 20 years, more experience than that doing real estate. And everything I do, 98% of my time is focused on doing the business and running the business. And you touched on creative finance, owner financing, seller financing, and all these creative strategies have been hands down my favorite way of purchasing properties over the years, and using the leverage of the property itself as well. So it's always good. It increases the return on investment when we do use debt as opposed to just paying all cash, right? So
sure. And you know what? I mean, I always, this is the way I get people to get comfortable with debt, because some people are just not comfortable with the concept of having a bunch of debt. And I talk about, kind of the proverbial, if I'm buying a company, ideally I'm going to use 100% debt, but if I can't, let's say I'm using 50% debt and 50% leverage, which is very common in buying companies today. And people are like, they talk about, oh, highly levered, it's got too much debt. And I think to myself, boy, if you just went out and bought a house that you're going to live in, and you put down 50%, most people in this country, at least, would feel really good about having 50% equity in the house that they own. They would feel really good about, only having 50% leverage on a property. And I think, boy, then why aren't we comfortable with that in business? And I think there's a time and a place for debt and for leverage. If I have 100% equity in something, then I also have 100% risk if something bad happens to that single investment. And I think a mistake a lot of entrepreneurs will make is they never think bad things can happen. Bad things happen every day. We have pandemics, we have wars, we have planes that fly into buildings, we have stock market crashes, we have bubbles that burst, recessions. I mean, there is stuff going on just with a higher frequency level. It seems volatility is not only here to stay, but the world's more volatile, and the frequency between big events seems to be shorter and shorter. So I think there is a place for debt. If,
right.
as an example, if you have 100% leverage or 100% equity in something, and something happens to that asset, you've lost 100% of the equity. If I have 50% debt and 50% equity, and I have 50% of my equity somewhere else being invested in other places, well, if something bad happens to the asset on the right, I still have 50% of my equity in the asset on the left. So I think there's a time and place for debt. People need to be comfortable as long as they're not over levered,
right.
and they need to be comfortable. But I think there's a time and place for debt. It allows us to spread our risk and to make sure that we have a diversified portfolio of assets, whether it be our company or real estate or whatever.
Yeah, that's great advice. I often joke around like, hey, be Dave Ramsey with your personal debt and your personal life, but not with your business debt and your real estate, So
Yes.
so yeah, that's awesome. And if you just pencil it, if you just do the math on, and I did actually this week, I was doing the math on, fully paid for return on investment compared to if I just leverage it to 75%, which are what the investment loans usually allow. The return on investment based on is just so much better based on your equity or your down payment as opposed to 100% paid for. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And you'll have diversified risk, more assets. And then when those assets appreciate and you monetize them,
that's right.
at an exit, you have more, you've got more capital. There's more value creation that way. That's why private equity, the world's most sophisticated asset class, private equity, 5 trillion in assets under management. It's like, how do they make money? They make money by buying, multiple companies, putting them together, selling them for high price. They use leverage. And, as a result of that, they generate returns that double the market typically. And that's why money keeps flowing in. It's like, we can learn lessons from a sophisticated asset class like that. And, you're doing that in your own empire, and you're seeing the same benefits that they do.
That's right. That's right. So I've got just a couple more questions for you, Adam. I know you've got some other things to get to, but what advice would you give somebody who's just getting started? And I know we talked about like, hey, get the unit economics level down, the $100,000 business down. But what advice would you give somebody just getting started?
So I think, so great advice, be voracious in your knowledge or your appetite for learning. And so read a lot, connect with others, peer groups, work with a coach, work with, if you have desire, and maybe not experience starting out, you can leverage other people's experience to bring them to bear for your benefit. So be hungry to learn. I often tell people too, if they're really focused on wanting to start a particular business, if you've never worked in that field or in that type of business before, then you've seen the TV show Undercover CEO. Well, go be an undercover employee. Go to work for, if you want to build a landscape maintenance empire, go work for one. See if you like the business. You're going to start a restaurant. Have you ever worked in a restaurant? Why don't you go work for one? Why don't you get paid by somebody else to learn the basics of a business or an industry? Observe what they do, see what they do that's successful that you can emulate, and take a look at where they suck and they're making mistakes so you don't make those mistakes. And it's like, take advantage of an opportunity to learn in an environment where nothing's at risk. You're being paid to
Right.
learn, and then learn and formulate your own opinions about an industry by getting experience in it. And if you're starting to build an empire and you're finding some low level success, find yourself, surrounded by people who have found success on a much bigger scale. You don't ever want to be the smartest person in the room. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So as you're starting out, you're building a business, get advice, join peer groups, and seek knowledge from others who are more successful than you, who can help you formulate the blueprint for success later down the road. And I think we all need mentors. We all need mentorship in our lives. If we can find a good nucleus of people, these aren't people that are in competition with you. Generally speaking, people will give you good, solid, sound advice based on their opinions and their own experiences. And what you're hoping to do there is cut the learning curve down, cut down the number of mistakes you're going to make, because we're all going to make them. But if I can minimize them by learning from others, by getting experience in an industry before I launch, boy, wouldn't that be great? So in your example, you're in the real estate, game, buying properties and leasing or renting them. It's like, boy, go work for a property management company, learn about the mechanics of it. Go work for a property maintenance company, learn about, rehabbing properties, or learn about, what's a good one versus a bad one. It's like, go be a property manager for somebody, one of the big REITs or property management companies, and, and learn. And
Yeah.
then as you're learning, you're taking copious notes, you're writing your business plan. And when it's time for you to come out of the shadows and start your own empire, you're doing it from a position of strength, knowledge, and learning,
I love
rather than, I think I can do this and be successful. You should have a better feeling that I know I can do this. I've seen it, I've been there, and I've learned from others.
Yeah, I often say work to learn, not to earn, right? And you're going to earn
Exactly.
something, but it's more important to, to learn from somebody that's ahead of you. And that brings me to my final question. And one thing I do remember when I first got started, I was doing, a deal here, a deal there, maybe 2 or 3 deals a year. But it wasn't until I got started getting coaching and getting mentorship and going to more trainings and seminars, I went from doing just a few deals a year to doing a few deals per month, right? And I have ever since. And here I am 20 years in. I'm still reaching up to people that are smarter than me, like yourself, getting coaching, getting mentors, and still learning everything that I can, constantly reading books and studying and things like that. But looking back, what would you have done differently in your first deal in your career over the years?
I tell people, I write my books, I give away all the royalties to charity. I use it to fund my philanthropic work. But I really wish someone would have given me my books 30 years ago. And, I don't think it was as common back then, to have peer groups and to seek mentorship. And so I would say, if I had it to do over again, I'd have been even more thirsty for knowledge and more focused on learning from other successful people that I could emulate and learn those lessons from, to try to cut down on my own learning curve. And so I grew up in an era where there was a lot of trial and error. There was a lot of mistakes made, and you got through them. And if you survived, it was because you had more hits than you had strikeouts, and you managed to build a reputation, and you kind of gutted your way through adversity. Today's world, you don't have to gut your way through anything with AI, with all of the peer group networks, with all of the learning opportunities that exist in life. I think that success is easier to find today than it was decades ago because of all of the knowledge base and the fact that the world's gotten smaller and there's more opportunities. I mean, if I go back to my early business career, there were no cell phones, there were no desktop computers, there was no email, there was no social media, there was no internet other than an academic thing or a government tool. It's like, boy, we were literally in the Stone Ages. Today, the world is much smaller. Technology joins us all at the hips. We can learn instantly. And if not from each other, we can learn from AI. And so I think there is just so much wealth of knowledge that we just have to get our nose out of our cell phones long enough so that we can focus on building, call it the plan. I think too many entrepreneurs start with no destination in mind. I think it's really critical today that you have to have a really good understanding of what success looks like in your own life. How do you define success? And what does the destination look like 10 years out so that I can start charting a course? And I talk about this in my latest book, and I talked about it in the seminar. It's like, if we're all in Los Angeles and I told you get in a car and drive without a destination in mind, you would spin your wheels and you'd drive a few miles, you'd go in circles, you wouldn't get anywhere. And that's most people in life. They don't have a destination in mind, and they don't know what success looks like. And so they don't know if they're there or not. They're just wandering around aimlessly. If I told you in LA, get in a car and drive to New York, all of a sudden you've got a destination. It's a multi-day trip. That someone's going to have to feed the cats, the dog, get the mail. I'm going to have to pick waypoints and stop at a hotel. I have a place to sleep. I'm going to eat. I need to pee. It's going to take me 3-4 days to get there. It's like you can plan. And I think if we're early in our careers or just starting out, or even if we're late in our career, but we're starting a new entrepreneurial adventure, we need to think real carefully about what does success look like before we start? And what's the destination I've got in mind, that's going to serve as my magnetic north, that's going to guide me in the early days of building my empire. And once I've established that, I can now move with purpose, and I can put everything against a litmus test of, is this helping me get where I want to be in 10 years, or am I wasting my time? So I think it's, in today's world, there's so much data and information out there. It's like, we got to learn how to take advantage of all of that. We got to build a network of people and peers and mentors, and then we have to have our own plan. And when we put all of that in place, success should be a much easier proposition to find.
Wow, such amazing advice. And I'm so looking forward to Empire Builder, your next book. And I believe that's a perfect way of ending it. That's a wrap for the show today, right? So I love it. I really appreciate you being on here, and I'll share some information below so people can follow you and reach out to you, get copies of your books and things like that. And I believe you're going to be on a call that we're both going to be on here in a couple hours here. In a little bit.
I am.
Yeah.
I am. It's funny. I gotta read JT's feed so I can see what I'm talking about before I get there. Right.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Hey,
it'll be great.
Yeah. Hey, Philip, thank you for having me on. I know we tried this a couple times. Glad we could finally connect and get it done. So thanks for having me.
We'll have to do it again after the next book. So thanks for being here. God bless you. Thanks. Make it a great day.
You too.
All right.
Take care now.